us this morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever you are in the world, because we saw some registrants from all over the place. So that's going to be super exciting. And before we kick things off, just a heads up to all of you that this meeting is being recorded, and we will post this in one of our channels so you can watch the recording afterwards. And if you do not consent to the recording, please leave the meeting now so we have that sorted. And let's jump in directly to our jam-packed agenda. Because we have a lot of things to share with you today. And obviously, the main purpose of having this call today is not just us sending. We obviously want to take your questions and have a good conversation with all of you to understand the challenges that you have out there, and maybe the questions and those types of things that you've seen out there. So as you can see, we have a pretty extensive agenda where we're going to share some of the new things that we have cooking, as well as the questions that people have submitted in the GitHub issue. But as always, people are a little bit shy in posting questions in a public repository. So hopefully most of you have saved up more questions that you will fire off to us so we can have a really good conversation and get some good feedback there. And obviously we're going to push for all of you to continue the great work that you are all doing in contributing and filing issues and all of that in Enterprise Scale and so on and so forth. And just reiterating, what most of you have probably noticed that I have enabled this magic feature that allows you to mute attendees so they cannot use the microphone. And we are going to keep it like that, at least for the first segment of this session. So if you do have any questions throughout the session, please post those in the chat and we will try to pick them up as quickly as possible. And now apparently we do have someone that should not be a presenter. Apparently, this was the very reason why we had this. Anyway, yeah. So and if there are any interesting questions throughout the presentation, we will definitely make sure to catch those either in the chat or stop the presentation and take those up immediately. So fantastic. So the first segment now is going to be around some of the new things that we have recently shipped or the things that we are working on. And first of all, hopefully most of you have noticed that in June, my dear colleague Jack, he did a great initiative in putting up this What's New page where we are trying to collect and add all of the changes and new things that we are publishing in terms of docs, tooling, policies, and so on and so forth within the enterprise scale ecosystem of all the things that we have. So for those of you that haven't seen that, just hit this link and you can get really good information around the things that we are cooking and also things that we have recently shipped. And this is something where we've gotten a lot of feedback from customers that this is something that is absolutely fantastic. So because there are new things coming in all the time, there are new policies that we are shipping, and there are things coming into ACOps and the reference implementations and so on. And this should be your one-stop shop to get on top of all of those different things. So that's just for those of you that haven't already seen that. We have this new What's New page that where we publish all of these different things. And then the second thing that I want to double click a little bit more on and give you a brief tour is the new reference implementation portal deployment experience. Because as probably most of you are familiar with, and I'm going to transition here now to share my screen directly instead. Most of you have probably been into our repository and are pretty familiar with the different reference implementations that we have. So here you can deploy the Contoso, AdventureWorks, Wingtip, and so on and so forth reference implementations. And all of these buttons have previously gone to different experiences with different templates and so on and so forth. So what we did and what we shipped during July was essentially a new converged experience where all of these reference implementations are essentially under one umbrella. So if I click on the Contoso button here or the Wingtip button, it will essentially be the same experience. And if I go in here, I can instead make the choices, for example, what network topology I want to have and so on and so forth. So this is something where we gotten a lot of feedback from customers that this is now a much nicer experience where you don't have to think about which button you click and so on and so forth to get in there. And I just want to point out a few new things that is good to know about, at least with regards to this. And yes, I am in my Microsoft tenant here now, so I do not have the tenant root permissions to be able to do a deployment here. But if I jump in here, one of the things that's good to know is here, as you can see, we have one option here where you can say that either I want to have dedicated subscriptions for the platform resources, so networking, identity management, and so on, in line with our recommendations, or if you want to do it in a with a single subscription for all of those things, we also allow you to do that directly in this experience. This is what was previously the Tray Research deployment option, but now we give you that option in here as well. So that's something that you now can choose this right off the bat in here. And then we also added a couple of smaller things in there. So as you can see under the network topology section, we now give you the option hub and spoke with your own third-party MVA, which essentially means we will provision a hub virtual network for you, but obviously then you need to think about how you deploy all of your appliances and so on and so forth there. And then what we also added, a pretty small change in terms of the platform resources, that we now also, if you are deploying a hub, we also allow you to pair the identity subscription and the identity VNet with the central hub that we have. So those are some of the changes that we've made there under the hood. And to enable this new experience, obviously, there's been significant changes into the code base, because I know that a lot of you have been trying to understand how all of this works under the hood. And from an ARM perspective now, this is now a much slicker experience. So if we go in, just taking a quick look what this looks like under the hood, if you look in the ESLC ARM folder, we can now see all of the composite templates for all of the things that we are doing here now. So we have now made it a lot easier. If you want to deploy this at your own pace, with your own sequence, perhaps do certain things with us one day and then other things another day, then you can do that. So we also, under this specific page, have instructions on how you can sequence what we are essentially doing with the portal experience on your own, so you can deploy your management groups and so on. So this is something where we also got a lot of feedback from customers that they want to be able to do this at their own pace and sequence these things on their own and start with a code first approach. And now we allow customers to do that. So those are some of the changes that we've introduced with this new one. And obviously, as part of this also, and we're going to share more information about that, comes the Bicep deployment option, which we're very excited to share more information about a little later during the session. So jumping back to my presentation instead, let me quickly switch over. There we go. Zoom. And there we have that. We should be back on track. All right. So this was the new Azure Landing Zone Accelerator portal experience. And as you can see on the name there, we say Azure Landing Zones there. So right now, all of these things sit in the Enterprise Scale Landing Zones repository, but who knows what is going to happen in the future, but nothing will change there, at least short term. So let's see on that. Well, I don't dare to talk about naming in this specific section. But if you look in the Cloud Adoption Framework repository, there are certainly references to Azure Landing Zone. So this specific slide and the specific page that we are sharing here now comes from the Cloud Adoption Framework. So if you go to Azure Landing Zones, then this is what you get. And if you click this button, you come to the exact same experience, just for your reference if you're in there and are clicking around. All right. And then I want to hand over to Jack for the next part. Yeah.
So following on from some updates and what we've been doing recently, some of you may have seen this. I tweeted this out, I think, earlier this week. this went live. So a lot of you work in partners, or work in many other organizations that might not use enterprise agreements. So what we've done for this article is actually add the capability for you to get guidance on CSPs, MCAs, and all different billing models that exist within Azure, and how they relate and how they can play within an enterprise scale framework. I will absolutely turn on my webcam. Sorry, I forgot that was not on. So everything inside of this article now, we include more than just an EA billing agreement. So you can find CSP related information in here and how to structure that, how that relates into an enterprise scale architecture, and how that sort of fits in with the hierarchy. So yeah, absolutely go and check this out. Please give us feedback. This was initially kicked off based on feedback from the community via GitHub issues on the documentation. So we do absolutely listen to those, and they get fed back into the team, and then we go and make changes to make sure that we're covering for all of those scenarios that our customers and partners have. So yeah, please do go and check this out, and be really interested to hear your feedback on this article. Moving on from here, if it's all going to play nicely. You may have seen this article that we released a few months ago now, but it's called the testing approach for enterprise scale. Sometimes you may have heard it referred to as the Canary deployment approach for enterprise scale. And this really is for customers who want to test policy definitions and test the hierarchy. So maybe RBAC inheritance, or as I say, those policy definitions in a safe way without getting into the mess of having multiple tenants, or going down that approach where it becomes hard to scale and hard to manage. So it's all completely possible within a single Azure Active Directory tenant, and this is what we would guide customers, most customers, to do. So this is effectively deploying, as you can see from that diagram, the exact management group structure side by side in the same tenant, and then basically guidance on how you would set that up, how you would separate your service principals to ensure that not one service principal has access over them all, and all of those various different bits and pieces. And then this enables you to test new policy definitions. So if you want to test a new deploy if not exist policy, for example, and you obviously don't want to make that to your production management group structure, if we call it that, you can have this Canary environment, and we call it Canary because we don't want to confuse it with dev, test, or any of those style of workloads. It's not a place for workloads to exist. So you wouldn't do this once per dev environment or once per test environment for your workloads. They would live in the production structure, and that's something that we're definitely going to cover later on in this presentation, so I won't give away too much now. But this is more for testing those policies and more of the platform elements before you move them into your production environment, where obviously all of your workloads will live. So please, again, go and check this out based on feedback. And we've actually implemented this with some large financial customers here in the UK. And it's based off of those feedbacks. There's a few people in the UK that have helped work with this. So thank you to those. You know who you are.
So is this something that all customers need?
That's a great question, Johan, and absolutely. And I think if you go into this documentation, you'll find there's a nice little call out that says this is not mandatory in any shape or form. This is completely optional for those more mature customers who may have change management processes or not be able to make changes directly into a sort of a production platform. This is only for those who need to, prove their testing and, almost show their homework before they can then promote that into a production environment and know that it's going to work. And the reason for doing it under that same tenancy is so that you don't have to worry about different principals, different user IDs, different groups. We all know that of the old school days where we had on-premise test AD domains and dev AD domains, and they were never in sync. And then, unless they stayed perfectly in sync from production all the way down, that your testing was nearly invalid, because actually you could never prove that was going to work again. So the idea of this is all in one tenant, all your identities are still the same, but actually it's just segregated off and easier for you to manage. And glad to see some of you are liking that approach in the chat. But yeah, please do check it out and give us some feedback. Moving on, we've updated the networking. So if any of you who've followed Enterprise Scale from the very early days would have remembered the long networking articles, and you would have kept scrolling, and it would have had guidance in there for hub and spoke. It would have had guidance in there for virtual WAN deployments, and it would have kept going. So what we did, based on feedback from the field and our customers and partners, is we split that up. So you'll now see there's a whole section for network topology and connectivity, and we've split that into separate articles, so you can find what you need very easily. So a lot of the articles are a lot shorter. Some of them even you don't even have to scroll now, which is great. But you can find the bit of information you're looking for instantly, and that it also gives us a better way of scaling and going forward. So you'll also notice another one in there, which we're going to talk about in a minute, which is the connectivity to other cloud providers. But we can just add those things on, put a link in a master document, and then move on from there. So just making some easy improvements to help you guys all navigate this with your customers. And another one of those articles, which Johan, I think you were quite instrumental in getting out and writing some of the policies behind this, is our private link and DNS integration at scale, which is obviously very important. Private link is very, very popular. But this is definitely one that I would go and read, and I would say read a few times, right? Because there's a lot going on in here. There's a lot of DINE policies that help achieve the outcome of this, and maybe Johan, you want to talk a little bit more about that, being that you authored them.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think this came out of the back of how can we do this at the larger scale? Because the challenging part for all of you that have worked with a private link for any service is how do we manage those DNS records? And if you have a single subscription in your MSD and environment, yes, then it works really well. But let's say you have 55 different VNets with different teams managing those. How can we make sure that when I create my storage account, how can we make sure that that's DNS record is visible in the central private DNS zone for that specific DNS zone domain name, so privatelink.blob.core.windows.net. So what we do here essentially is detail out how you can achieve this at scale with the deploy if not exists policy. So essentially what we do is when you deploy a private endpoint of a particular kind for a particular service, we detect that, and the deploy if not exist effect then goes and registers this particular private endpoint in the central private DNS zone that you have, so you can have full visibility across the entire estate. But to Jack's point, this is quite complex, and there are a couple of moving parts. So I highly recommend you to read through the article a couple of times. And should you have any questions around it, feel free to reach out to us or open an issue on GitHub. But something that has been out there for a while, but still something that customers do not know about. So it requires a shout out for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, and great work there, Johan, on the policies. They are certainly very good at what they do. All right, moving forward into another one is the one I mentioned just a few seconds ago, which was the connectivity to other cloud providers. So we realize that not everybody just wants to use Azure. There may be other customers that have multi-cloud platforms, so AWS, Google, or maybe even Oracle Cloud. That's quite common as well. And obviously Microsoft have partnerships there with Oracle Cloud. So we've provided some guidance here as part of the networking section on how we would suggest connecting to those other clouds. So there's various options, right? There's building VPNs between the two clouds. There's maybe using a provider like Equinix in the middle to provide a private connectivity via physical connections between both of those clouds, and them acting as sort of a middleman. You as the customer could act as that. If you've got a large network and you've got the skill sets to take that on, you may decide to actually become the transit network between all of that with various express routes or direct connects or interconnects. But we've got some guidance here on all those different types of models, and a nice decision flow chart right at the top here that calls out, which way we would suggest you go based on a number of questions that you answer. And I think it's really important that the first the bullet point on here, or the first part of the flow chart that says, do you actually need communication via private IP addressing? Because actually some of it might be, all web facing API driven integrations. There's no need to enable private connectivity in that case. So you can just carry on using public IP addresses. But absolutely, some customers may have security requirements or may have other requirements to enable that private connectivity between clouds. And therefore, you can follow through the flowchart and be steered to the correct option for you. This article actually needs a small update based on some recent changes that have happened in the platform around FastPath, but nothing too major. And we've already got that in a draft at the moment. So that should be out within the next couple of weeks. So keep your eyes peeled there. But again, if you see anything or you want to ask any questions, please feel free to raise a GitHub issue against those on the docs pages, and that will make its way back to us, and we will take that feedback on board. All right, so not strictly enterprise scale related, but obviously any of you who are working with enterprise scale understand that a lot of it is actually policy and the way to control and orchestrate the platform. So there's actually been a big improvement to audit if not exist and deploy if not exist policies, and something called the evaluation delay. So any of you who have used a deploy if not exist policy as part of enterprise scale, maybe enabling a security center for your subscriptions or sending the activity logs or diagnostic settings back to the central log analytics workspace, you may have seen that it can take sometimes up to sort of 15 minutes for once that resource has been deployed that's in scope of that policy to take effect. It can take 15 minutes or so to take effect and then plug in those settings and do the deployment. What actually happens now is you can configure that delay, so you could actually provide set that value to 0 and it would trigger instantly as soon as that resource has been created. Now there are some things that you need to be careful of. So say you spun up a VM, the VM actually being complete and built to the platform is instant, but actually is that VM ready to maybe install an extension or install an agent upon it? Maybe not. So it might be better to wait for one of these others, like where it says after provisioning success or after provisioning, to make sure that it actually has finished and it's in a properly ready state before you do another deployment upon that resource. So keep that in mind. The default time is 10 minutes, and that's unchanged from today. But yeah, keep that in mind. And another dying improvement as well, which I know a few people on the call were big parts of getting this changed. So thank you to those, you know who you are. When you deploy a new subscription and put it in the management group, that now triggers the dying trigger to kick off, which it didn't before. And we're talking a little while ago here, but that's again quite a big change that's very instrumental for this. So yeah, definitely good to call out. Also, the goal of enterprise scale, right? So you may see a lot of custom policies that we have. The goal here is not to maintain an ultimate list of custom policies within the enterprise scale architecture. We're working really hard behind the scenes with all the engineering teams to take these policies for each of the services on board themselves, so that they actually become built-in policies, so that we don't have to do a big sort of definition upload or updating them as we go along for the life cycle of the enterprise scale. So you may see policies move away from custom and being provided as part of the enterprise scale architecture, but they're actually being built in. And again, check the what's new page. I think there was a big update in sort of the end of June, July time when we released the new deployment experience. And myself and Christian did a lot of work there to make sure that all of that stuff is documented in the what's new page. So you'll see there, and we'll always say, this custom policy definition is now this built-in policy definition ID to do that mapping for you, so that you don't have to go and work that out for yourselves. And that video at the bottom there is a link to the policy quarterly call that they host with the communities, and there's links in that YouTube description to go and sign up. Highly recommend, because they talk about all things that are coming to policy, resource graph, and ARM on a quarterly basis to the public and to all of our customers and partners. So go and check that out and watch some of the ones in the past, because they're very valuable.
And I think there were one thing that they also shared during that very call that you linked to there, a new effect, right, that may also help us with some stuff. So I don't know if we want to share anything about that.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a mention to a new effect that's going to come along, but we're still in early days on that. So I would say stay tuned to those channels and go and investigate those. But yeah, I will let the policy team announce that officially when it comes out. But yeah, keep your eyes peeled. There is a new effect on the way, which will certainly help with deploy if not exist deployed resources. All right, let's go forward. We are seeing some of the stuff in the chat. So yeah, but some of the bicep stuff, we will definitely be getting onto that. So we'll keep an eye on that. But yeah, if somebody wants to answer some of the questions in the chat from the team, that would be awesome. So a few other things that are going on. So the Terraform module for enterprise scale, and this one's called CAF Enterprise Scale. We've just released version 4. Or version 0.4, shall I say. So really hard work there, great work by a lot of the team. So Kevin, Simona, I know you've been very heavily involved in this. And this release really brings the connectivity to the table. So the hub connectivity, not the spoke yet, although we do enable some of the pre-plumbing in terms of maybe one side of the VNet peering, but we're just finishing up the docs for that, so that they should be out hopefully by latest the end of next week. I've seen the first draft, so that is there today. Please feel free to raise an issue if you've got an urgent requirement and you need to use the connectivity stuff. Please raise an issue, and we'll help you guide through that and get going. But yeah, great release, and it's only going to expand more. We also have made a bit of a big change. So some of you who are using Terraform on a daily basis may have seen that in the latest version of the Azure RM provider, they've taken away or they've changed the way that policy assignments are done. So generally there was Azure RM _ policy _ assignment, and you put the scope as part of the properties or the variables for that Terraform object. But actually they've moved away now, so they've got an individual Azure RM policy assignment per scope. So there's one for management groups, subscription, resource groups, and all the way down. So what we now have had to do is basically migrate to that. So go and see the guidance of the release notes. If you click on the version 0.4.0 here, that will take you to the release notes, and we document all the things that have changed there. Or check out the what's new page, and we'll link you to it from there. And finally, as I said, there's a lot of wiki updates coming to the Terraform module. So we've realized that we've put a lot of development effort in, but we actually could do with improving the docs a little bit further. So thank you to all of you, those who have raised issues and said, it would be great if it was clearer on how we did custom definition assignments or anything like that. We're listening to that, and we're slowly closing them off. So if there is anything in the documentation that you don't think super clear, now will be a great time to let us know. So please raise an issue on the Terraform repo, and let us know about that. And we're also working on a short YouTube series to actually, instead of making you read the docs, we'll show you how to do it instead. So keep your eyes peeled in the coming months. We're in the process of recording those now that we've got the module to sort of a parity state in terms of feature set, and it's not going to change too much. We'll be taking that forward. So yeah, please stay tuned to the IT Ops Talk YouTube channel, the one that a lot of the cloud advocates use, like Sarah, and a lot of the other people in the team. So we'll be putting it on there and running that as a mini series on there. BITEP. We're going to talk about this in a bit more detail, but we are currently working on that. I'm part of the team that's currently working on that as well, and we're tracking for around October. So we started development earlier this week, but it's going well, and we should be ready at some point, but by the end of October, to release that to all of you. So keep your eyes peeled. There is already an existing issue. I should have put a link into it here on the Enterprise Scale repo. I'll be posting updates there, so please stay tuned to that as well. And finally, the brownfield guidance. So we do have an existing document on how to migrate into an enterprise scale architecture, but we realized that it could do with some more enhancements, right? So how do you move from, say, if you've got a single subscription, you've got all your resources in there, versus how do you move if you've gone for a geo split hierarchical structure? Lots of things and lots of different scenarios that we're going to add into the guidance enhancements. But yeah, that's it for the ESLZ roadmap. Johan, do we need to stop and answer some questions before we move on? Thank you for finding that issue number. I knew it was 5 something.
Yeah, no, exactly. So yeah, I think we had a couple of interesting questions that I think we could shed some light on. Regarding the Terraform stuff, we are going to go deeper into that as well and share some differences between the different modules that are out there and Correct. So on and so forth later. But we also got another interesting question. So we got a question from Miles here asking, are there any plans to introduce another landing zone area that is both online and corp? For example, a VNet integrated APIM/app gateway. So what do we say about that? The archetypes or the different landing zone types that we have, corp and online, is that something that is set in stone, or can you create more of those, and why would you do that?
Absolutely, great question. So absolutely, you can create your own workloads. We've built Corp Online, and I think there is also a SAP one in some of the diagrams as well that you may have seen. But absolutely, the management groups beneath landing zone are workload structured. So it's an easy way of grouping workloads that fit a certain pattern. So Corp would be, they have a VNet, they maybe connect back to a hub that has private connectivity back to on-premise. That's a very well-known pattern and style of architecture, right? So that's one pattern. Online is it doesn't have that connectivity to any private. It's all modern web apps or APIs that are all accessible over the internet, and they have no connectivity between each other. So they're two very distinct patterns, but there is no reason, if you think actually my organization or the customer or partner that I'm working with, we have a very defined pattern that we do, absolutely create another landing zone management group for that pattern and apply your policies that make sure that everything inside of that management group, subscription wise, all comply to the same sort of structure that you want to define. But what I would say is be very careful. Don't just go creating a management group per every workload, application or service. You should be able to find a lot of commonalities between them. And to be perfectly honest, in engagements that I've done, we haven't had to really change from corporate online.
No, exactly. And is there anything preventing us from deploying, for example, a VNet integrated API management gateway and app gateway in a corp landing zone, for example? What is there anything preventing us from doing that? We may prevent people from creating public IP addresses, for example, but could we, in theory, deploy them there? Would that be fine?
Yeah, no, absolutely. When we would absolutely advocate for those sort of connectivity services like App Gateway or APIM, that actually they should be deployed within the landing zone themselves. So inside the subscription where the application or service needs to consume them, and not use them in a centralized fashion, because they're actually, we have seen customers hit scaling issues where they've gone for that centralized approach, and then suddenly they've actually got a single point of failure in their architecture where one application gateway is getting absolutely hammered and it's taken down all of the other landing zone sites that are hanging off of the back of that app gateway. So yeah, we would say democratize that and make the application or the landing zone owner deploy that themselves inside their own landing zone and avoid the centralized model wherever possible.
Exactly. No, and I think it all comes down to your requirements. If you want to allow public IP addresses in corp connected landing zones, you can absolutely do that. As long as from a security perspective, it's okay. We are not here to dictate the rules for your landing zones. We give you examples and patterns that you can start with, but then it all comes down to your requirements. For sure.
Exactly right. You may choose to, exceptions are not something we promote and say do at scale, but if you've got one subscription that you need to make an exception for a public IP address, there is no reason why you couldn't do that in the platform.
Awesome.
Any more questions?
I think we got a question around if we are working on anything around billing and cost management to enhance and optimize that.
Nothing that I'm yet aware of in terms of, I agree there's probably some more work that we could do there. It'd be great to double click and get some more information into that. So I see that's raised by Ashley. So please feel free to raise that as a GitHub issue. Provide as much detail as you can. That's one thing I can say with the GitHub issues. Please provide as much context and the why as you can. And we can kick off a conversation there and maybe arrange a call and dive into that a little bit further.
Mm. Yeah, I think we covered all of them there. So I think we can continue on to the next segment.
Cool. Okie dokie. So our hot topic. So this was one that was raised on the GitHub issue that we raised for this call. So thanks to whoever raised this. We will call you out in a second. I'm just trying to remember who it was. But this is all around how do we do dev, test, and prod, or how do you do dev, test, prod inside of Enterprise Scale? And actually, I would say that me, Johan, and the team actually, don't see this and would say avoid this at all means necessary, because it doesn't scale very well. So this is maybe something that you might think that you want to see, right? So but let me just turn on the pointer. So beneath the corp or online landing zones, you have a prod, dev, test management group, and then you would have your workloads in each of these or each of the workload subscriptions inside of these management groups, and split them out per environment. Well, you may think that works fine, but actually what we see that this doesn't actually scale very well, and it can be even worse when you split this out per app or per service, because then it's an n times something calculation. So if you've got 20 apps, then 20 times 3, it very quickly racks up, right? You see the point here. Now there is you're unlikely to hit limitations, but you're going to start pushing things. And also, what's the actual difference between these workloads, right? That's the key thing here that I think a lot of people got to take away, and I think that's something that me and you've stressed quite a lot, right, Johan?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
So what we actually suggest is staying very closely aligned to the ESLZ conceptual architecture. So, you know, even though we just talked about, could you create another landing zone management group here for another workload like SAP or maybe something a bit more specific? Absolutely, you know, nothing wrong with that at all. As long as you're not just creating more management groups for the sake of it, you know, try and find the commonalities and try and make them fit existing patterns that you've got defined before you go and create another one. But this is what we would suggest going forward. Now, the reason for this is that actually, if I expand this out a little bit further, you know, let's double click, right? So I've removed some of the management groups here, but actually this is, you know, the bare crux of what we're talking around here. So each of your applications, you know, so if we say you've got a corp app 1, they would have 3 subscriptions, and they may have a prod test and a dev subscription, and they should be isolated at a subscription level, and therefore you can assign different policies if you need to, or different RBAC permissions, which is typically the thing that we need to do at a subscription level instead of doing that at a management group level. Now, you may think that that adds overhead, but actually as part of a subscription vending process, that's very easily done. And once you've defined the template once, it's very easy just to keep going and rocking and rolling. And that's the same for prod, test, dev, across online or corp or any of those. And then don't forget the sandbox, right? This is something that a lot of customers seem to overlook. The sandbox is built for development. So if you've got a set of developers or a new application spinning up or a new service, and they don't know what services they're going to use yet, right? But you may have restricted some of the services that people can use inside the landing zones. Then actually what you can do is say, well, the sandbox hasn't got all these restrictions in place. Here's a subscription in the sandbox. Go and do what you need to do. And by the way, just, you know, you may have a rule in there as a company that says you can't put any customer data in there. It has to be anonymized or whatever. You know, but go and play in the sandbox. There's less restrictions in there. Get a working MVP and then evolve from there.
So, Jack, I can see here that we have separate subscriptions for prod, test, and dev. Is that something that we should always have, or are there specific scenarios where it would be potentially okay to have dev, test, and prod in the same subscription?
You certainly could, right? And I suppose I'm going to say that typical word, it depends. But, you know, if it depends on the scale of your application. If it's a very, very small web app, so let's take app service as an example, right? This is a good example. App service has a great feature called slots. And by splitting it across different subscriptions, you lose the ability to take advantage of those slots for like blue-green deployments or Canary deployments or anything that you may choose as a deployment strategy. So actually, it may make more sense to do it inside of one subscription. And obviously, you have other scopes inside of that subscription at resource groups to, you know, maybe tailor some RBAC permissions if you really need to. But generally, I would say most customers will go for a separate subscription because it is the ultimate security boundary.
Understood.
What's your
Cool.
take on it? Anything to add?
No, I actually agree with you there because it very much depends on the types of workload you're building. But I think it's a dangerous path if we're saying that you should always have 3 subscriptions. Let's say I'm deploying a very small application with 1 app service per subscription. Then one can debate whether or not if it's worth it. But some customers, they absolutely do decide to have a pretty standardized approach. So they always create 3 subscriptions per landing zone. But that's up to the customer and all down to the requirements, of course.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of customers I've worked with have actually ended up creating product lines or like catalog items for internal sort of repositories or ServiceNow tickets that say my workload requires 3 subscriptions if they know that, or they can go through a process which will actually help them define that and work out how many subscriptions they may need. But remember, enterprise scale is all about enabling scale, so we don't want to pin you into one subscription early on. Like we don't want an application to go from 1 VM and a couple of app services to then thousands of VMs, and then suddenly you're at that point where you're like, we should have split subscriptions at the early days. So always keep that in your mind. If you think you're getting to that point where you need to segregate, do it early, because moving resources within the platform is not always as straightforward as it should seem. And I think just one other thing to add to this is, as we've said there, right, the dev environments here, could they become sandboxes, right? That there's always that question here, where if it's pure development and they're really, trying to see what is possible, not with customer data, then actually could that become a sandbox, right? So to reduce that even more, so it may only be 2 subscriptions they need in a sandbox, and that sandbox might be a shared sandbox that developer is assigned or a team is assigned that they all use. So lots of ways to skin this one.
Yeah, there's a good conversation here around the policies and testing and so on. And I also shared the link to the testing approach that you mentioned before, because it might be that Robert was not on the call at that point. We also got a really good question actually related to, do we have any plans to provide a service catalog for consumers to consume predefined landing zones and additional services like that? So
really interesting, and there are certainly a couple of ways that we can build services using a few things like template specs and stuff we've got today. Nothing that I'm strictly aware of, although it is something I know that we have logged on the backlog in terms of something we're looking into and seeing what we could do. Johan, anything from you to add?
No. So I would say what we are working on is a set of at least accelerator templates that customers can use to get started with certain services. And if you look into our list of issues, it's the Compliant Workloads Initiative, where we're looking to at least provide a set of artifacts, and those could absolutely be hosted in template specs, for example, so you could consume those kind of like a service catalog. But as it stands today, we don't have a service catalog service per se in Azure, so you would still have to work around that and call the templates and find them somewhere, either in template specs or in a repo that you have. So that's a story that is not yet complete in Azure overall, but something that is certainly being worked on from different angles. And we are gonna try to provide at least a set of templates and so on the workload side to start that journey.
Yeah, and I think the same goes there. I've just seen one coming for the subscription vending machine. That really fits into sort of a very similar conversation, something that we're aware of and something that we've got a few MVPs for with Power Apps and all sorts of things. But we are working on that in the background to try and see what we can deliver that's the most universal across all the different billing methods that we have out there. So yeah, it's very easy to get something out of the box for one, but we want to make sure that we encompass pretty much everything from day one. So yeah, watch this space, right? And again, log feedback on if you've got ideas or you've got suggestions on how this should work. We'd love to hear your ideas. So please log an issue on the GitHub repo with some info or a feature request, and we can do there. The private marketplace is an interesting one. Unfortunately, it's just the marketplace. It's not custom templates and stuff like that in your own. So yeah, it's something that we could potentially open up an engagement and a conversation with that product group. But yeah, please log your ideas. Let us know what you think, what you'd like to see, and we'll factor that in.
Awesome. All right, so let's continue.
Very key takeaways from the dev test prod scenario, right? And you'll be able to come back to these and take a look at these or take a screenshot. But management groups should align to the workloads and archetypes as we've discussed as part of this call, right? There should really be no difference in policies between environments. And this is something we didn't really get across, right? So why make a development team or an application team develop something for development that is less restrictive and relaxed that then won't work in test or then won't work in prod? You might as well, make them develop for production in the first place, and that just makes them become better at getting services out quicker in the future because they're not hitting a hurdle or stumbling over something every time they promote through environments. So design it as if it was going to be production from day one. You may choose to reduce the SKUs or reduce the sizes, but actually when you get into testing, you might need to do performance testing and all those things. So you might need to replicate exactly what would be in prod. But from sort of a security perspective, there's no point in being very open in dev and then going through test and prod and it being different. Splitting by environment doesn't scale very well, and as we said, there's a calculation to be done there. N times 3, 20 apps, that's 60 management groups. That only gets worse as you get bigger. Use the sandbox where you can, and I think the last point here is key. Empower your application owners, right? We talk about here in Enterprise Scale that we're all about subscription democratization and giving the application owners the keys to the subscription to do what they want. With that empowerment comes responsibility. So put that on them in terms of they're responsible for their costs. They're responsible for what SKUs they're going to use. They have to budget for those things. Now, obviously, that takes time and requires a certain level of maturity in terms of the cloud adoption journey. But these are the things that we should be absolutely driving towards and making those moves now.
All right.
Bicep. All right, we mentioned this really quickly, and I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to whistle through this. But please keep putting stuff in the chat. We will come back to you. As I said, coming to October 2021, it's using the latest features in Bicep 0.4 plus. So things like low text content and stuff like that will be included. So keep an eye out on those. We're aiming for AdventureWorks or the hub and spoke connectivity as a first off, because that's one of our most common deployment patterns, but we'll look to add the others soon after. It's all going to be modular from the start, so very much like what you've seen from the enterprise scale ARM that Johan showed at the beginning with the DIY templates. Exactly the same will exist for Bicep. So if you don't want to do it all in one big go, you'll be able to do them in incremental steps, and there'll be guidance on how to do that and how to sequence them. And the same policy, so some policy elements are likely to stay in JSON for reusability. So obviously we've got the policies inside of Enterprise Scale repo today, but instead of converting them all into Bicep or doing a decompile, nothing is being decompiled. Everything's being rewritten from the ground up for Bicep to make sure we do it the right way. And we're gonna, instead of having to load in all of those rules for policies and all of those different bits and pieces, we're just going to use the load text context and use some of the techniques we use for the Terraform repo, where we actually pull all the policies in to the repo, and then we'll use them there so that we know they're absolutely consistent. And then from a contribution perspective from you guys and for us maintaining it, we have one thing to update that means that it's always up to date in every repo as soon as we make that change. So
yeah. That is awesome. And we also actually got a question in the chat about which policies.json is the current one. And it's absolutely the ESLC ARM version that is the current one. And we are working on removing the older versions of that as well. There is a PR in there, but there are some things that we are waiting for before we can push that through and merge it. So we will make sure to clean that up so there's no confusion around what's the current version of all of these different things. So that's important to call out. All right. Last but not least, we got an interesting question in GitHub right around Terraform feedback in general, and you already shared a fair bit of that. But I think one of the most common pieces of feedback that I get from customers is that, okay, I see that there are two CAF modules out there, and both seem to be able to deploy enterprise scale. So what is the difference between those?
All right, yeah, no, great question. So, yeah, thanks for raising this, whoever raised it. And yeah, absolutely, we hear this all the time, and we will look to update the CAF guidance. We'd love to hear your feedback from this session and what we present here so that we can add to that guidance before we publish it. So if you've got any feedback on this, please let us know, raise an issue, or ping us offline. So the CAF-Enterprise Scale module is the official module that we write and look after as part of this team. So some of you may know Kevin in the team. Kevin does a lot of the development on this, but we all pitch in and all do different bits and pieces here. So this is the one that we look after and maintain. It delivers only the components included in Enterprise Scale. So this diagram to the top left, where my laser pointer is, it delivers mainly these elements, right? So your management group hierarchy and the management groups, the RBAC assignments and the policy definitions, because that's effectively what Enterprise Scale is. We then also have the management stuff, where we have an automation account and a log analytics workspace, which we also have support for now inside of the Terraform module. The identity subscription we provision and connect, but we don't do anything else with it, and that's exactly the same as we do with the deploy to Azure experience. And with connectivity, obviously, as I said earlier, you can have that connected up, and we will deploy the hub region as of version 0.4.0 that has been released. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. But this is the one that is there. It's got complete parity with the Enterprise Scale implementation. And we've got a few little bits to tidy up, like virtual WAN and a few other bits and pieces. But it's really simple to use. You can get started with probably less than 20 lines of Terraform, probably actually 5 if I'm being completely honest, and trimming it right down. But everything's fully customizable if desired. There's options to provide policies and archetype definitions in YAML or JSON. So there's lots of flexibility in this module and lots of nice nifty features, and they're all in the wiki. So please do go and check them out. And it's also usable in any operational approach. So whether that's a centralized approach, whether that's a decentralized approach, you can use this in whatever shape or fashion you like. So yeah, that's a great module to go and use if you want just to focus on the enterprise scale. The other one that a lot of people have seen and call out is the CAF Terraform landing zones module. And this was actually created by some CSAs out in Singapore, so Arno and Laurent. who you may know, and it also uses the custom container for deployment called Rover, which you may have come across and heard of. It has various levels from 0 to 4, so 5 levels in total, and there's a separate state file and pipeline for each level. And as you can see, there's a diagram here that shows how this all links together. The focus here for this module, though, is actually on the workloads and the services that live in the landing zones, and there's a currently supported list of what they can deliver inside of 3 and 4. And it actually uses the CAF Enterprise Scale module in the earlier levels to deliver enterprise scale. So we've been working with them, we've been chatting with them, and they've actually taken our module on board to do the management group policies and RBAC stuff for them. So, but it does lean more towards that centralized operational approach where you have one team that deploys everything IT related, which is not something that we advocate for inside of enterprise scale in terms of, you know, that decentralized approach and subscription democratization. So there's some differences here. We're working more and more with the team to try and provide some better guidance on which ones customers should use. But what my honest takeaway is, if you just want enterprise scale and you just need the policies and RBAC and you're purely focused on the platform elements, use the CAF Enterprise Scale module. And if you're looking for more, then, you know, and you want to do workloads and stuff like that, then maybe you think about considering both, right? So use the CAF Enterprise Scale module because it's got a lot of features in there. You can manage that separately. And then you can use the CAF Terraform landing zone module to deliver your landing zones on top, because you can just choose any of these levels optionally on top as well. You don't have to do all of them in the go. But yeah, more info in their docs there. Go and get on there. But yeah, please give us your feedback, but hopefully that's helped clear up a few questions around that. But the CAF Enterprise Scale module is the one that we would suggest for enterprise scale based deployments.
Awesome. That was a lot of, and we got a great question. I managed to answer most of the questions in the chat, so I think we're pretty good there. And like I mentioned in the very beginning, like we always push, but this is an open source project. It's on the public GitHub repository. So if you see issues, if you have feature requests, bugs, or whatever it may be, file an issue, submit a pull request if you're comfortable with that, and we will make sure to handle all of those things and improve all of this guidance for everyone. So that's just a shout out here. Make sure to chime into the community and help out everyone to improve this architectural guidance and the reference implementations in all of the repos that we manage and maintain. So
yeah, absolutely
fantastic.
I've seen a question from Tobias in the chat as well about the TF module and the variables. Just to call that out, if you look in any of the pull requests, you'll notice that we actually do a ton of checks, and we actually do full end-to-end deployment tests of pretty much every variable option every time we release a new feature into the Terraform module. So it's not a guarantee, but it gives us a lot of confidence that it's going to work with the various options that we add. So and you'll be able to see those. So look at a pull request, look at the checks, and you'll see we test various versions of Terraform. I think all the way back from 13 up to the latest release, and various permutations of the Azure RM provider as well. So yeah, we do a lot of testing. I think it's about 16 tests that happen at the moment of various Terraform configurations. So yeah, we do an awful lot of testing to make sure the Terraform module works before we release it to the wild.
Exactly. No, that's awesome. And Alan asked the question, would Pulumi be an option? It's absolutely possible to deploy enterprise scale landing zones with Pulumi. However, from our perspective, we want to be where our customers are. We do recognize that Pulumi and a lot of other tools that are tools that customers use, absolutely. But we focus on the broader customer base. So ARM, Bicep, and Terraform is what we are going to continue to manage and maintain for now, at least. So we have no plans to ship something related to Pulumi. But as always, it's you can follow the guidance and build out the architecture with Pulumi. That's absolutely no issues with that. Awesome. Really? And yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, you know, we've provided a couple of examples here. Hopefully the GIF animations are playing. They may not be during our testing earlier, it's hit and miss, but we've provided some examples, and I'll upload these to the documentation pages on the Enterprise Scale repo that show you very quickly on how to update documentation and how to raise issues if you're not confident or have done that before on a GitHub repo. So we've got some very, very short animations that will show you how to do that.
That's fantastic work.
All right, most important part of the call, and apologies we've taken so long. Hopefully you've all found it useful, but it's Q&A time, right? So obviously you've been asking tons of great questions in the chat, and please keep them coming. But yeah, you know, now is your chance. If there's any questions, please do raise them.
Exactly, yeah, and I also enabled so you can all unmute now. So if you want to raise your hand or just come off mute and ask ask your questions, fire away.
While we see somebody do that, it's great. We're seeing a couple of hands go up. That's great. There is a survey to fill out. So before anybody runs away or has another course to join, please take the time to fill out this survey, because as per what Timo's just asked in the chat, is there going to be some in the future? Absolutely. If this has been useful, please fill out the survey, let us know, and that will give us the time and the opportunity to make time to do these calls. So please fill that out.
Fantastic. So Sebastian seems to have a question. Feel free to come off mute, sir.
Hello. Just to come to multi-tenancy, we unfortunately do require multiple tenancies, one for a security constraint, and the other is because we have services that span the entire tenant. M365 is a big one for us, with a lot of people using it, and we don't have anything like the search functionality suddenly run on a test site. What support is there for managing multi-tenancies?
So within Enterprise Scale, obviously, everything inside of Enterprise Scale is Azure focused at this time. There is a small part on Azure AD, but everything is deployed within a single Azure AD tenant, right? So a management group cannot exist across two Azure AD tenants. So it would be a deployment across both of those. So highly suggest using infrastructure as code to give you the flexibility to keep everything in sync, depending on what option you choose. Obviously, you've got various options there, but yeah, infrastructure as code will be a must if you're managing multiple tenants, in my opinion.
That is exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And we actually do have a number of customers for various reasons that does exactly that in multiple tenants. So it absolutely works. It's just that you need to make sure that you can handle that orchestration. All right.
Thank you.
No worries.
All right. So is there a deck that we can use as an introduction to ESLC for customers? We can probably make sure to follow up on that. So I think I see that you are an FDE PIM, so I can absolutely share some material to you there. No problems. Okay, and then we have Carl, how to understand this huge 10,000 plus lines policy file, Jack. How do we do that?
Very, very good question. And this is something that we're working on, right? So we understand that is hard to contribute to. Believe me, it's even harder to review when somebody makes a change to it. So yeah, we feel your pain, and it's something we're working on. I was literally on a call this afternoon to start discussing how do we start tackling this. The reason that big file exists is for deployment. There are some things that happen inside of ARM that when you deploy all your policy definitions, and then we want to go and create some initiatives on top of those, because ARM by default will do everything at the same time, right? It does parallel deployments. There is sometimes we've seen in the very early days of Enterprise Scale where the policy set definitions or the initiatives would fail to deploy because it didn't know the definitions had been deployed, even though we had a depends on and all those things in place. There was just a race condition in the platform that the way around it is to do it in one deployment, and hence why that one big file, because everything happens in one go, and then we know that everything deploys it on the same ARM node, and therefore it's successful.
Yeah, and Wahid also shared a great resource, the doc we have detailing out all of the custom policy definitions that we provide as part of Enterprise Scale landing zones. So if you look at that link, Carl, hopefully that will help you a little bit. But on the 10,000 lines of JSON, yeah, then it's another story, like Jack mentioned, and we are working on to improve that experience. But if you want an explanation on the policies and the intent of those, then that doc should hopefully cover what you're looking for.
Yeah, and Carl, I'd love for you to just post that. I'm going to ask a question. If we could split that into individual policy files, but then automatically compile that big policies.json, because obviously we need it for a successful deployment, would that be a better way? Every policy split out into an individual policy, and then we automatically, like using GitHub Action, compile that for you. Would that be better for you? But just looking for some instant feedback.
Yeah, maybe I grabbed the mic and. Yeah, what can I tell you about your suggestion? At our side, we have this. I guess we group our policy initiatives, and we have some kind of framework for that. So maybe I need to take a look at your documentation a bit better. Maybe I would expect some kind of correlation between the documentation and the smaller building blocks. And indeed, maybe the compilation is the technical solution to keep the provisioning going on. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, great. Thanks for coming off mute there.
Awesome. And I think we are at the top of the hour. So Tobias asked the question, does deployment method of ESLC differ in general, or is there a strategy to keep it at the same feature level or done at best effort? We absolutely want to make sure that we keep them at feature parity, and that is the strategy moving forward as well. So we want to make sure that we have parity across ARM, Terraform, and Bicep, of course. So that's the strategy, 100%.
And hence why we're taking that approach with like things like policy. We're not going to rewrite things where we don't need to. We're just going to reuse them and make the other tools adapt and take them in as raw objects rather than decompiling or doing anything. All right. I've also seen is the presentation shareable today? Yeah, we will work out a way to get the presentations out to you all. But yeah, leave that with us and watch out for maybe an email or something like that where we'll be able to share that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in, and thanks for asking so many great questions. And we will make sure to look after if you had any additional questions in the chat and try to answer this. But mindful of everyone's time, we're still one minute over now, so we want to make sure that everyone can jump on to the next call if you have one. So thank you so much, and hopefully this was useful for you. And make sure that you fill out the survey so we can improve and learn more about what you want to hear about in the coming calls.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks all.
Cheers.